Hello again.
Welcome back. This is the 7th installment now.
Really? 7?
We've made it to 7.
The divine number.
And we also had 2 weeks off around Easter, right?
Who can remember that far
Who can
back?
remember that far back? So it's been quite a lengthy series. It's certainly been a delight of our week having these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're glad to hear that some of you are enjoying the conversations too.
Yeah.
Feel free to engage, to offer comments, questions. We'd love to hear feedback, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Okay, so 7th episode.
7th episode.
We spent last time talking a little bit about the North and the move towards Celtic Christianity and
Right.
Gaul.
So Christianity becomes a European religion.
Right.
By persuasion through the monastics, as well as through coercion through state.
Right. So what is our pithy title for this week?
Today, the title is going to be The Cross and the Sword, Church and State in Medieval Europe.
Ooh.
The Cross and the Sword.
So the Crusades.
We're going to be talking about the Crusades, and in a lot of ways, the Crusades sort of, in popular imagination, are all of medieval church history. They're sort of everything that happened in the medieval church. There's actually a lot more going on, and in some ways, the Crusades, even though they're very important, were very marginal to what was going on in the center of Europe, and really served more than anything else to define Europe as an entity
But a
apart
lot of people
from the
died
East.
in the Crusades.
Certainly a lot of people died, and it really defined Europe, Catholic Europe, as distinct from both the Muslim empires as well as the Orthodox Eastern Christians.
Well, and it's cemented a lot of the Islamophobia we still have today.
Absolutely.
So it's,
Absolutely.
it has cultural ramifications that really go out in all directions.
Right, you have this real breakdown in trust between Christian Europe and the Muslim empires in the Middle East.
So let's just jump in.
Absolutely. So last time when we were talking, we talked about this series of popes who make the Carolingian dynasty their protector, right? They name the Holy Roman Emperor some guy in Germany, and the joke, as you put it out, is that the Holy Roman Empire is
Neither holy nor Roman. Discuss.
That's right. Linda Richmond, Mike Myers' character, Linda Richmond from Saturday
give
Night
you a
Live all those
topic.
years ago.
I'm getting a little glimpse.
But what's important to realize about the title is that title used to belong to the Byzantine emperor,
Right.
that he was the protector of the Romans. Now the Pope is saying the protector of the Romans is up north. So the center of gravity of the church is shifting north. The center of gravity in the church is also attempting to centralize in Rome. And what you see develop in the Middle Ages is this struggle between kings on the one hand and popes on the other, right? Princes and clergymen over who gets to control the politics of Europe and the church of Europe. And in some
It all
ways,
sounds so familiar.
right? And in some ways, we're still living with the legacy
Absolutely.
of that. However, in European time, in the medieval times, we have to remember, in medieval Europe, we have to remember that the church actually had significantly more political power than it has now.
Of course.
The church had its own armies. It had its ability to tax and raise armies.
Can we bring that back?
Yeah, why not?
I
that's
want
that's
my
a
own,
great idea.
I think I should have my own army and definitely have the ability to tax.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
We wouldn't worry
Why
about
not?
our mortgage anymore if
That-
I could just levy taxes.
That doesn't cause any problems.
No.
And on the other side, the kings wanted to really have more control over the church. They
Yeah.
wanted to be able to
It's a
appoint
power
bishops.
struggle. Yeah.
They wanted to be able to tax clergy. They didn't want clergy to be exempted from all of these things.
It's all about power and money.
Absolutely.
So what year are we talking about here?
So here we're right in this sort of turn of the millennium, turn of the first millennium.
So
right
around the year
1000.
1000.
Absolutely. And Pope Gregory VII is the first person we need to talk about. He's really a reforming pope, but reforming in such a way that he's attempting to centralize his power and centralize his authority.
I generally don't think of Pope Gregory as like a good guy.
Exactly. It's not the kind of reforming that we think of now, that reforming is this positive.
No, this is
thing.
not like enlightened
He's
despotism.
centralizing he's centralizing his power.
Right.
And one of the big people standing in the way of his power was Henry IV, the Holy Roman Emperor. Henry had appointed 3 bishops. Now, Gregory, being in a position of wanting to centralize power, doesn't want a king appointing bishops. It's called lay investiture.
I can understand that.
Fighting against lay investiture.
It would make me grumpy too.
Absolutely. The question is, who gets to dictate the agenda of the church?
Right.
Is it the Pope in Rome, or is it the Holy Roman Emperor, or whoever the prince is of a given area?
So Gregory, this is what I remember from history, Gregory gets mad and excommunicates him.
Absolutely. And he calls on all of his subjects to force him to recant. Excommunication wasn't just a church act, it was a political act. It meant that his subjects were
Nobody
no longer...
can take communion.
No one can take communion, but his subjects were no longer bound to him.
Right.
And his subjects had the option of rising up in rebellion against him.
Right.
So the lords that were under him could rise up to overthrow him.
I think you made a very good point. I just want to go back and clarify. So if I'm Pope and you are a king,
right,
and you appoint bishops and I get mad and I excommunicate you, none of your subjects, not just you and your family, but none of your subjects can take communion.
Right, certainly, and that's what the interdict was. That's going to be another papal tool that they have.
Okay.
And so, yeah, absolutely, using that kind of tool, none of the subjects would be able to take communion.
No wonder they were so mad.
Right? It would be a little bit like a sanitation strike in New York City. That all of those sins would just kind of pile up into this massive pile of filth, and people would get very nervous and upset. People would be separated from their churches, not unlike now in some ways, separated from their churches in this kind of...
So does that mean nobody can get baptized? Way. Nobody can get married?
Last rites.
No
communion.
Ooh, okay.
Right? That's a big deal. So it puts a lot of pressure on a Christian leader to recant.
Sort of like everyone's living like we live now.
It puts a lot of pressure on, but there was no Zoom.
Yeah,
and nothing would have been. Well,
there's no Zoom now.
Either.
Sorry. It's been a rough morning.
A little bit. 1077 though, Henry actually does penance. He famously walks barefoot in the snow. At Canossa.
There's a movie that has a really artful depiction of that.
That's
I'll
awesome.
have to look for it for you.
Yeah,
I know you would
love
enjoy that.
It's
very like bloody feet walking through the snow.
Of course. So this act of humility, the Pope is all satisfied with that.
Very good.
A few years later, though, Henry breaches this agreement. He's re-excommunicated, and this time Henry decides to make his own Pope, anti-Pope, as history remembers him as the anti-Pope, Clement III.
I will make my own Pope. That's an amazing plan.
Right. Well, when you think about it, though, if you look at what happened in England under King Henry VIII, in this kind of historic trajectory, it makes a lot of sense.
No wonder it appeals to me.
You have this struggle between the crown and the Pope. And in France, that struggle is going to continue even into the modern period. Anyway, it's settled at the Concordat of Worms, where it's decided that there will be no lay investiture, but a king can make a bequest to a church to sort of court favor from church leaders.
So are you team Gregory or are you team Henry?
I can see a reason for both of their arguments. I think as a Protestant, I probably should be team Henry, but
you're
I'm
not.
kind of team Gregory.
You're team Gregory.
Well, because I think... the
church should be church.
Church should be church and state should be state, yeah.
I'm team Henry.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. But you can see the argument from both sides. Gregory wants to centralize power under Rome.
Yep.
Priests should be following orders from bishops who are following orders from the Pope. All of it stays within the church.
And Henry's like, it's my land, it's my people. I want to do what I want.
Exactly. A few years after Pope Gregory The other thing that's important to note at this point is there's this major rift between
What is the
East and
Concordat
West.
of Worms?
Oh, the Concordat of Worms was where they decided that you'd have no lay investiture, but
I
lay
only
bequest
knew
to the
that there was
church.
the Diet of Worms. I didn't know there was a previous Concordat.
Oh yeah, Worms is kind of a happening place right up.
He
through
went
the
on
early
a
modern
diet of
period.
worms for the Lord.
That's right.
Sorry.
Some Betty Butterfield references there.
If you haven't looked up Betty Butterfield and her views of church, you might want to do that.
That's right.
It's a little... That's not educational.
No, that is not
Betty
educational.
Butterfield.
The other thing that's important to note here, we began by talking about the fact that Europe and the East, both the Christian East and the Muslim East, are becoming more and more divided.
Yes.
One of the big division points.
Was it a great division point?
It was a great schism. 1054, you have the Great Schism. In some ways,
And how many popes do we have?
well, you just have the one pope in Rome.
Okay.
But then you have various patriarchs
Okay.
of the Eastern churches.
So like Antioch?
Antioch, really Constantinople is going to
Mm-hmm.
be the ecumenical patriarch. You have a patriarch in Alexandria. You have various Orthodox
Mm-hmm.
patriarchs. But there's going to be this break between the Pope in Rome and these Eastern patriarchs at the Great Schism.
Right.
In some ways, this is nothing new. They had been hurling anathemas and excommunications back and forth for centuries.
Yeah.
What was new, however, is that these anathemas, for some reason, just stuck. They never got rid of them.
You're worse.
Right?
These are worse heresies.
That's right. And so there's this breakdown in communication
Mm-hmm.
and fellowship between East and West. And what we see over this time period is that breakdown is just going to increase.
Yeah, they're going to get further and further apart over time.
Absolutely.
But are they really that far apart?
Well, and in some ways, it also gave early Protestants
Yes.
this model of having
How does schism?
a church, an Orthodox church, both as named Orthodox and literally, sort of in tradition, that was not under the authority of Rome.
Yes.
It showed that you could do church without Rome, which was a helpful model to early Protestants.
We can do church without Rome?
Mm-hmm. Well, and Rome, of course, was deeply upset
It was like,
and offended
no, you can't.
by that.
You can't do church without Rome.
Fascinatingly,
We do.
the Greek churches always consider the church in Rome to be its own kind of church that governs the Roman
Mm-hmm.
territories of Europe, whereas the Roman Catholics would then install new bishops.
Yes.
Let's see here. Right, so this division between East and West, between the Orthodox and Christians and the Muslims and the Orthodox and Catholics, and the Western Christians and Muslims really accelerates during the Crusades. The Crusades were sort of the brainchild of Pope Urban II, I think 1095.
Okay.
He issues his famous. Oh, we have a.
Go ahead,
visitor
keep
there.
going.
Okay. He issues this famous call for crusades, and he offers a plenary indulgence for crusaders. An indulgence is something that's often misunderstood, especially in a lot of Protestant circles where indulgences play such a key role in what becomes the Protestant Reformation. An indulgence was really meant to get the soul out of purgatory. Now, according to medieval Catholic understandings, contemporary Catholic understandings to a large degree as well, the afterlife consists of hell, of course, down below, and heaven above, but purgatory in the middle. Now, purgatory is where a Christian soul will go to be purged of its sins before entering heaven. If you are in sacramental union with the church, if you are in full communion with the church, then you have the possibility of salvation. However, all of those sins that you maintain throughout the course of your life, that you commit throughout the course of your life, don't just go away. Instead, in the afterlife, there's a place where those sins will be punished, and that place is called purgatory. Now, what an indulgence is it basically lessens or remits some of the punishment in purgatory for those sins. So Urban II offers
Did I miss purgatory?
You did.
Oh.
Urban II offers a plenary indulgence for participating in the Crusades.
Who made up purgatory?
Well, again, I was just sort of talking about this idea that in the Middle Ages, you have this idea that if you're a Christian, if you're in union with the church, then you certainly will be saved, but nevertheless, you still have to pay for all of the sins that you commit in this life.
Yeah, it's such a
in
weird
purgatory.
idea.
Well, it's a question about the concern about the justice of God, right? Can a person who commits grievous sins just get into heaven without being purged of those sins?
I'm not going to take us down this rabbit hole. We're going to continue with history. We're not going to go into theology, but it's tempting.
But the plenary indulgence is what gets you out of purgatory for free. Interestingly,
because apparently you can buy your way out of purgatory. That's theologically sound.
And interesting, there is a whole economy of indulgences that develops, because this is one of the first big indulgences.
Oh yeah.
But then you have partial indulgences develop later. You can get some years off purgatory for visiting Rome. Then you can get some years off purgatory for visiting certain local shrines. You can get years off purgatory for doing certain local activities. There's actually an inflationary spiral.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you've read the Canterbury Tales, that's what they're doing. They're going to Canterbury to get time off purgatory, and part of some of the pilgrims that go with them are selling indulgences and selling relics and selling...
Now, technically, you're not supposed to be able to sell an indulgence. The indulgence... is either sort of a thank offering, or some people even would say that you're buying the piece of paper that it was on.
So it's like buying weed.
Well, yes, like buying marijuana in Washington, D.C. Exactly. That you have this model where people purchase a piece of artwork.
Or a cookie.
Or something, and are given like marijuana as a gift.
I just learned about this. I'm very...
So in some ways... it was a similar model, that you would give a donation to a church, and as a thank offering for that donation, you would get an indulgence. That's certainly what happens with the whole conundrum of indulgences around St. Peter's at the time of the Reformation.
It's amazing.
But suffice it to say, a lot of people are enticed by the plenary indulgence. And they go.
Well, yeah, because if you're worried about your dead relatives, you're like, oh, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, or worried about your own soul, and have a taste for adventure.
Perfect.
And you want to
You would have
see
totally done
the
this.
East. I don't know.
Yes, you would.
I don't know.
Not the Crusades, but you would have gone to shrines and stuff.
Oh yeah, that absolutely.
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
You totally would have.
I think. Had I been in the right mindset, maybe.
I don't think you're a crusader.
No.
But I do think you would be like, I collected this relic.
Right. You would go visit relics. You would sort of...
It's the tooth of Saint...
steps. Exactly.
Saint Nunu, and I've collected it.
Yeah, very fascinating.
That's a great career option for you, actually.
To
relic collection.
Relics, yeah. To ask for offerings to see my collection of relics.
We could just have it here at the rectory.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So the First Crusades, 1095 to 1099, the Crusaders go to the Holy Land and actually recapture large swaths of the Holy Land that become the Crusader states. This First Crusade was a major victory. All the subsequent Crusades
less victorious.
Were much less victorious. So the Second Crusade, 1147 to 1148, the Crusaders failed to retake one of the cities that they had gained. The Third Crusade is really sort of the one that we probably know the best because it's related to Robin Hood.
The Robin Hood Crusade. Yeah. This
Richard
is the only thing I know about the Crusades.
Yeah, Richard the Lionheart.
I shouldn't have admitted that.
Went to the Middle East.
Right.
And of course, you have England left with
Prince John.
And he's the tiger, right?
He's the tiger, and he's served by Sir Hiss.
Right,
who is a snake and lives in a basket. And the sheriff of Nottingham is a bear. That's historically accurate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I learned everything about Robin Hood from Disney.
But anyway, Richard the Lionheart, he fails to retake Jerusalem, but he fights against Saladin. And they kind of gain this sort of mutual respect for each other as very talented soldiers and warriors.
They kind of become friends.
Barbarossa participates in this, and he dies on his way back to the Holy Roman Empire, and his soldiers actually pickled him to bring him all the way back to the Holy Roman Empire.
It's a lot more intense than Disney.
Yeah, absolutely. But the Third Crusade is really the crusade that stands out in our minds.
Yeah.
As this sort of failed attempt to retake Jerusalem. The Fourth
Lots
Crusade...
of poetry around the Third Crusade. And,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Knights and chivalry and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
The Fourth Crusade was called by Pope Innocent III. Now, Innocent III, like Gregory, is one of these centralizing, reforming popes. He intervenes heavily into politics. So when the King of England, for example, does not accept the Archbishop of Canterbury, he placed the entire country under the interdict, which means that, no sacraments. So
they're living like we are.
Exactly. The sins of the people are just piling up, like the New York City sanitation strike.
So many sins. So little time.
And to appease the Pope, the king gave Innocent England as a feudal territory.
I give you
right?
England.
So,
can you do that?
Pope Innocent III is, you could do all kinds of things and sort of like rethink what that means in the Middle Ages. So Innocent's power grows. He's the one who leads the Albigensian War. The Albigensians were a kind of, my understanding is they're sort of like a neo-Gnostic type group that was preaching throughout Europe.
Yeah. They killed them.
Yeah, exactly. They sort of rooted them out as heretics and killed them. The other thing
I think we think that's sad now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people view that as very heavy-handed. It's an example, though, that the church was able to use political powers, right? The power of the sword to enforce
theology, right belief, orthodoxy.
And not just orthodoxy, but submission to the Roman pontiff, right? Submission to the institution of the church, right? It's not just about ideas, but about politics and polity.
Right.
He also was the one pope who endorsed the Franciscans. One of the biggest positive legacies of Innocent III was that he allowed for the establishment of the Franciscan order under St. Francis. We're going to talk more about that next time.
Which is really interesting to be so anti...
But one thing that's important about that is the Franciscans and the Dominicans as well were these mendicant monks.
Yeah.
And they would go throughout the countryside
they don't have a lot of political
preaching.
Power. Yeah.
Right, they didn't have a lot of political power, but also they would be useful in sort of shoring up the orthodoxy and the conformity to the Catholic Church throughout Europe. Nevertheless, very gentle people in a lot of ways. Very brilliant people. You have also in the Dominicans these very brilliant minds like Thomas Aquinas. We're going to talk more about that next time with the sort of height of the Middle Ages. I figured we'd talk about the bad first and then...
The war part?
The war part first and then talk about the good part. Or what I see as the good part. A lot of people view the Crusades as this kind of noble, heroic time period from the Christian past. Yeah.
That's rough.
A little bit. But anyway, Innocent...
It's a very masculine understanding of God. I just feel like I need to say that. Sorry.
It is. Innocent calls the Fourth Crusade, though, and the object in this crusade is the Crusaders are going to go down to Egypt and then back up to the Holy Land.
Yeah.
Instead, they get some horrible directions and wind up in Constantinople on the other side of the Mediterranean.
I knew we should have taken a left at Albuquerque.
Right? And they sack Constantinople.
And you're like, why?
The irony being, Constantinople is a Christian city, and they are going out as these crusaders, these warriors of the cross, and instead they're wreaking havoc on fellow Christians.
Yeah.
They take the Hagia Sophia and make it a Catholic church.
Yeah, it's real bad.
So that schism that began to open up in 1054 really is cemented by this. There is some very, very bad blood developing between
well, you can't
between
just
East and West.
Sack someone else's.
Right, and then force their churches to submit to Rome.
It's like St. Peter's taking over the Methodist Church for fun.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't condone that.
No.
Tim, that's not a threat.
No. See, that's one of the good things about the church sort of shedding political power in the modern era.
We don't have an army that we launch against other local churches in Poolsville.
And looking at this, it's such a hypocritical view of the gospel, right? that we're going to take up arms for Jesus and go kill people for Jesus.
That's why, we struggle sometimes with modern hymnody, with onward Christian soldiers marching forth to war.
Right. Nevertheless, hymns like that speak to this whole romantic conception of this time period.
Absolutely.
Right? That there was such a thing as a Christian soldier. Crusade, it's worth mentioning, is a word that tends to have positive meaning and negative meaning. In our contemporary world. I remember after 9/11, George W. Bush got into some hot water because he referred to the war on terror as a crusade, and then had to clarify that and say, well, no, this is not the West fighting Islam.
We're not fighting Islam.
Right,
no.
This is a war on terrorism. The crusade was probably the wrong word to use. But people talk about themselves as moral crusaders.
Crusading for justice.
Crusading for justice.
Or she's on this silly crusade against... Yeah.
Right. So, nevertheless, this word crusade, this history stands out in our mind as very present.
So we've sacked Constantinople.
Constantinople, of course, eventually goes back to the Greeks.
It's not a great moment.
Nevertheless, it was not a great moment. Innocent III is centralizing power. However, that's kind of the main point of what's going on. 1215, you have the Fourth Lateran Council, where priests are told that they should tend to their duties. You have the Easter duty, where you have confession and Eucharist one time per year for every faithful Christian. That's an important thing to note, is that in the Middle Ages, frequent communion was not common.
Right.
Not even, in the Catholic Church, right? Because all Europeans are, in essence, most Europeans are Catholic at this point. But it was far more common to go to Mass to see the host. You had what's called ocular communion.
Ocular communion, the elevation of the host.
Exactly. That was far more important to medieval piety than actually receiving.
You had to make that noise, right?
Yeah, or you'd have
the bells.
Your bells,
the bells ringing.
Right? Certainly have bells.
So you'd be outside doing whatever, and you'd hear the bells. You have to come, run in, and see the communion, and then you're good.
Right. Mass was much more an event to be seen than something to be participated in. Also, transubstantiation was defined.
A huge amount of the population didn't understand what's going on anyway.
Right. Or they just sort of had a different understanding of what going to church was for. Going to church wasn't to participate. Going to church was to see. Going to church was to receive a sacrament or to see sacraments being done.
It was more mystical, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
A little more magical, a little more mystical.
Well, and when you think about the folk needs of a rural people, a pre-modern rural people, then absolutely a more mystical ritual would be more appealing than this sort of intellectual experience. Even though intellect was present and reflection was present, and you had lots of ways of teaching Bible stories, nevertheless, the ritual aspect sort of took prominence as in the importance of piety. Let's see, so transubstantiation, we'll talk more about that, I guess, next time when we talk about the seven sacraments and all that kind of stuff.
It's up to you. We're still in the Crusades.
Absolutely. Pope Boniface VIII, who makes an appearance in Dante's Hell, demonstrates the limits of papal power. So if Innocent III represents the height of papal power, right? He gets to, in essence,
But isn't Boniface after the Crusades?
Yes. So when we get to the Fourth Crusade, that's really sort of the last major crusade. Then we have a lot of sort of smaller and even very bizarre crusades after, like the Children's Crusade in the year 1212.
There was a Children's Crusade.
Right. You had two bishops, one in Germany, one in France, who foolishly encouraged children to take up arms or whatever they had and go to the Holy Land to try to win back Jerusalem. The children were tragically either killed, some of them drowned on their way there, or they were sold into slavery. It was just a disaster.
Because Children's Crusade is like an Onion article.
Right. Yeah. Right. Just one of the very unfortunately humiliating aspects of our history.
That's bleak, man.
And then you have a number of the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th Crusades, again, all fail. They try to retake Jerusalem. Sometimes they succeeded for a period, but ultimately they're defeated 1248 in Egypt is really the last attempt at crusade. The Fourth Crusade, though, was the last kind of major crusade. Yeah.
Children's Crusade. You could talk about Boniface.
Yeah, so Boniface, so if Innocent is going to represent your height of...
I just wanted to wrap up crusades.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. If Innocent represents kind of the height of papal power, right, he basically bested the King of England, then Boniface is going to represent the height of papal power, or the limits, rather, of papal power. So he engages in two power struggles with King Philip IV of France, and he loses both of them. On the one hand, he wants his clergy to be exempt from French taxes, and on the other hand, he wants the right to judge a French bishop before the before the state can judge a bishop. It would, in essence, allow for churches to have control over the punishment of their own
Clergy.
people.
Canon law versus civil law.
So he issues Unam Sanctum in 1302, in which he says, I am the only authority on earth. All church and secular authority
Not good.
are subject to me. So every king in Europe has to listen to everything that I say, in so many words.
It's good to be the Pope.
Philip, of course, doesn't like this.
It's like, no.
And he
False.
sends an army to go get the Pope. And when they get into the papal chambers, very famously, one of the knights takes off his glove and smacks the Pope in the face. Smacks poor old Pope Innocent or Pope Boniface in the face. He's taken into exile, and he's so sort of shaken up.
I wonder
by this,
how many
he dies.
indulgences you need to counteract the sin of smacking the Pope in the
I've actually
face.
often thought of that and wondered what kind of gall you would have to have, or what kind of motivation you would have to be ostensibly a Christian and then smack the Pope in the face.
Pope smacking.
Right? I guess you have a bishop somewhere else telling you that he's overstepping or something like that, or that you're within your rights to smack the Pope in the face.
I'm not a Roman Catholic, but I wouldn't smack Francis. I feel like I'd get in trouble.
Well, Francis also is not making the far-reaching claims
I know, but
that Boniface made.
I don't think I want to smack a Pope. It just seems like bad luck, bad karma.
Right. Well, and it also goes to show you that there was, within the hierarchical worldview of the medieval mind, it wasn't so solidified that it was unimaginable that someone would smack a pope.
Right.
Right. That there was some wiggle room for negotiating how this world should be structured and ordered.
But that sounds like papal fallibility.
Mm-hmm. And that's really what they're going to start debating.
Bum, 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 bum. Segue.
There's the segue.
Sorry, it was a little heavy-handed.
So Philip the Fourth of France, I think I might have said sixth force, but anyway, Philip the Fourth, he forces the conclave to elect a French pope, and then he moves the papal court to France, to Avignon, where incidentally they have a wine region called Châteauneuf-du-Pape.
That's right.
Which means the Pope's new house, or the Pope's new castle. You can still go visit the Pope's castle there.
You can still drink the wine.
In Avignon. Of course, this is tremendously beneficial for the French king. Now, the Pope resides within his territories.
It's a good deal.
Nevertheless, a lot of Northern Europeans liked this model better because if you were, say, for example, in York, in England, getting to Avignon is a lot easier than getting to Rome. You don't have to go over the Alps. You don't have to take a dangerous sea voyage. Much easier. So ultimately, the Avignon papacy works out fairly well. It's not too traumatic, but everyone has this sense that, the Pope of Rome, the successor of Peter, really ought to be in Rome. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, in 1376, the papal court under Gregory XI returns to Rome. Gregory's successor, however, one of his successors, Urban VI, is really unpopular. No one likes the guy. So they decide to elect yet another pope. The cardinals convene and elect another pope, Clement VII. And he sets up his court in Avignon again. And so now you have 2 popes.
Are you allowed to have 2 popes?
Well, you probably shouldn't. So what you have is what's called the Western Schism. So it's not the Great Schism,
3 popes?
but the Western Schism. Well, at the Council of Pisa, they decided they were going to solve this problem. It's a classic church council.
We're
They
gonna
went
get
in
another pope.
gung-ho, and they said, you know what, we're going to solve this problem. We'll just elect another guy. But when they elected the other guy, they didn't depose the 2 popes that were already sitting.
We have 2 popes now.
We have a pope and a pope emeritus. At this point, they have 3 popes, all making claims to be successor of Peter, the sole successor of Peter.
I'm the greatest of the popes.
And you really have this major divide in Europe. So Aragon and
I
Scotland.
think they had like pope battles.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like to see who had the coolest pope.
It was
hat
very much
or...
like Democrats and Republicans today, in terms of this massive political divide. And you'd have some who were party to Avignon, some who were party to Rome, some who were party to Pisa. Aragon and Scotland famously recognize Avignon. Italy and the Roman states obviously recognize Rome. The Holy Roman Empire, that massive mosaic of political loyalties, recognized all kinds of different popes.
Helpful.
And it wasn't until the Council of Constance in 1414, 1418, that all 3 of the popes were deposed, and Pope Martin V was elected to rule from Rome, and ever since then, the Pope has ruled from Rome. Another important thing that happens at the Council of Constance...
Should have called it too many popes.
Right. Too many popes. Another thing that happens, though, at the end of this Western Schism, when you had 3 different popes and different loyalties, was the promotion of conciliarism. This is the idea that the power of the church ought not to rest in a single pontiff, but in the council of the church. The church, as a gathering of bishops, should be able to decide matters for the church.
Right.
This, of course, is what happened at Nicaea. This, of course, is what happened during the first ecumenical councils. So the Council of Constance was thinking, well, maybe we could just go back to that kind of model. Ultimately, that's going to be the next big power struggle within the Catholic Church.
Sure.
Who's in charge? Who gets to decide? Is it the bishops as a gathering? Is it the single Roman pontiff as the heir of Peter and the head of the church? Who gets to decide? Luther is going to come up with yet another option, that it should be the individual Christian who gets to decide, although he didn't quite mean that. The individual Christian reading his commentary on the Bible should be able to decide. King Henry is going to say, well, obviously the King of England or the king of a territory should get to decide what the church is going to look like in a territory. Ultimately, the Council of Constance in some ways is setting the stage for this Protestant Reformation as this political event.
Yeah.
This question of who's in charge. The bishops, is it priests, is it individual elders?
And there's not going to be an answer for...
Ever.
Yeah, I was about to say for ever.
Right. So in some ways, what you have into Lateran V, the Fifth Lateran Council in 1512, 1517, is this attempt to end conciliarism, but the real questions about who's in charge were not solved.
No.
So ultimately, where we get to by the end of our talk today, you have these attempts to centralize authority in Rome, centralize power over even political states, but you ultimately wind up in a very precarious position by the beginning of the 16th century. And that precarious position is going to erupt into the Protestant Reformation. So in some ways, it's very fascinating.